Nobody questioned why a 4-bedroom home on 40 acres was selling for less than a junk car. That should have been my first red flag. The listing agent said the Blackwood homestead had been unoccupied for 87 years. Properties in rural Nebraska don't just sit abandoned for nearly a whole century. Someone always finds a use for the structure, the land, anything. But this particular house just sat on its plot, slowly decaying, as the nearby town of Havens Creek swelled and then receded into almost nothing. My name is Eliza Vance, and I found myself in Otoe County without any other options. A bitter divorce, a sudden foreclosure, career in pediatric care that vanished when the Omaha hospital downsized me out of a future. The $9,000 asking price for the Blackwood property was the only number within my reach, and I was far too worn down to question why a sizable farmhouse on 40 acres of arable land was cheaper than a beat-up sedan. There's a bit of folklore. The agent admitted as I signed the documents. In her tiny office on the town's main drag. Her name was Barb, a woman in her late 50s with hair dyed a defiant shade of jet black and a gaze that never quite settled on mine. Nothing to fret about, just local legends. What sort of legends? She rustled some documents, avoiding the question. You're a courageous one, Ms. Vance. Havens Creek could use more of that. The town itself felt like it was holding its collective breath when I drove in. Population 652 declared the weathered sign off Highway 75, yet I saw maybe 10 people on the streets that crisp autumn afternoon. The grain elevator, the gas station, the charred brick shell of a community hall that had burned too. The ground in the 1950s, every other storefront was either shuttered or vacant. And the few locals I encountered watched my sedan with expressions I couldn't quite decipher. Not unfriendly, not really. More like they were measuring how long I would last. The Blackwood homestead was located 3 miles from town, down a gravel path that my phone's navigation had never heard of. I drove past fields of corn gone to waste and a line of Osage orange trees that seemed to have been withering for generations. Then the house materialized, and I finally grasped why it had remained untouched. It hadn't just been abandoned, it felt repelled. The building itself appeared structurally sound. 2 levels of limestone and timber, a porch that wrapped around 3 sides, a brick chimney. But something about its presence was deeply unsettling in a way I struggled to define. The window panes were all there, yet they seemed to swallow the daylight. The porch bowed deeply in the center, as if burdened by an invisible weight for decades. And the ground surrounding the house was barren. Not one weed or tuft of grass grew within a 50-foot radius of the foundation. Like the very soil was recoiling from it. I cut the engine and stayed in my car for a while, observing the house as it seemed to observe me. Then I took my luggage and headed inside, because my bank account held a mere $52. This decaying monument to whatever transpired here in 1937 was the only shelter I could now call my own. I wouldn't discover the list of rules until the following evening. By that point, leaving was no longer an option. The first thing I registered upon entry wasn't the flaking paint or the buckled floorboards, or the scent of decay mixed with something far more ancient. It was the silence, not the simple quiet of a deserted building. I'd lived by myself long enough to recognize that kind of stillness. This was different. This was the quiet of a space where unseen occupants are trying not to make a sound. I placed my luggage in the entryway, just listened. Silence. Not even the groan of old timber settling, which should have been a constant in a structure this old. The atmosphere was heavy, almost viscous, as if the air hadn't moved in generations. The inside was a time capsule. A calendar hanging in the kitchen was turned to May 1937. Unwashed plates were stacked in the dry sink, coated with a layer of grime that had seeped through window cracks during dust storms that predated my parents' birth. A child's boot lay on its side by the kitchen door, tiny, leather, and laced, waiting for a foot that was never coming back. I moved from room to room, pretending I was just taking stock of necessary repairs. The front parlor with its stiff-backed sofa and portraits of severe-looking individuals in their best attire. The dining room, where a table remained arranged for a family of 5. The dishes were filmed with grit, but otherwise undisturbed. Upstairs, I found 3 bedrooms. One for the parents, 2 smaller ones with iron bed frames and discolored quilts. A child's wooden rocking horse stood in the corner of the smallest room, its back to the door as if it had been punished. Everything felt off, and I couldn't explain how. The house was like a baited trap, waiting to be sprung. I discovered the root cellar during my second walkthrough of the kitchen. A hatch was built into the floorboards near the pantry. It was a formidable iron door, about 3 feet by 3 feet, secured with 3 heavy padlocks, each one rusted completely shut. Someone had etched words directly into the metal. As I crouched to get a better look, the etchings resolved into letters, rough but clear. They are still below. Do not release them. I sat back on my heels, staring at the message for what felt like an eternity. The logical side of my mind, the one that had spent years in a pediatric ICU and witnessed sights that would make grown men faint, dismissed it as a joke, some local kid's idea of a prank, or an old owner's attempt to deter squatters. The other, more primal part of me, the part that recalled my grandfather's tales of spirits that roamed the plains before settlers arrived, urged me to get back in my car and not stop until I reached the Colorado border. Instead, I drove to the hardware store in Havens Creek. The man at the counter was in his 70s, with hands like gnarled roots and a face etched by too many Nebraska summers. His name tag read Silas. "Bolt cutters," I said. "The heaviest you've got?" He observed me for a second. "You're the one who bought the Blackwood place." It was a statement, not a question. "That's me." "There's a cellar hatch in that house," he said, his voice slow and deliberate. "Has some writing on it." I saw it. Silas reached beneath the counter and produced a pair of large bolt cutters, but he didn't immediately pass them to me. "My granddad told me stories about that place when I was just a boy. Said the Blackwoods were decent folks until the big drought hit. Then they got desperate, made a deal they shouldn't have." He paused. "Granddad said whatever is in that cellar, it isn't the Blackwoods now. Not quite." "What is it then?" He just shook his head. "Don't know. Don't care to know. But I'll tell you what my granddad told me. Some doors are locked to keep something in." He placed the bolt cutters on the counter. "Sometimes the lock isn't meant to keep folks out." I purchased the bolt cutters anyway. They cost me $42.50, which was nearly all the cash I had left. That evening, I knelt by the cellar door, a flashlight in one hand, the cutters in the other. The house was utterly dark around me, and I could have sworn I felt a presence beneath the floor. Not a sound, but a kind of tense anticipation, a coiled readiness. I snipped the first padlock. It fell with a clang that seemed to echo for too long. I cut the second, then the third. The hatch swung open by itself, smoothly and with an eagerness, as if it had been waiting 87 years for someone foolish enough to free it. And from the darkness below, a woman's voice sighed finally. The odor hit me first. Not mold or decay, but something arid and ancient, like air sealed away since the Great Depression, preserved in that subterranean void like the contents of a pharaoh's tomb. I could smell hay and soil and something else underneath, something that reminded me of how my grandfather's hands smelled after a day in the garden. Earth, roots, and things that thrive in the absence of light. I aimed my flashlight into the opening. The beam sliced through decades of stillness, revealing a wooden ladder that descended about 12 feet into a space much larger than I anticipated. The walls and floor were packed earth, hard as rock. Shelves lined the perimeter, crowded with glass jars containing some dark substance preserved produce, perhaps or fruit that had long ago turned into black mush. Then my flashlight beam found the rocking chair. It was in the far corner, angled toward the ladder, and someone was in it. A slight figure hunched over and shrouded in a gray blanket that was probably once white. The shape was completely still. It didn't react to my light. "Hello?" My voice was surprisingly firm. "Is anybody down there?" No response. The figure stayed motionless, and I tried to convince myself it was a doll. A scarecrow. Some prop left by former residents as a cruel joke or a warning. I told myself many things in those few seconds. None of them were the truth. I started down the ladder. Each rung creaked under my weight, the wood groaning after nearly a century of disuse. The air turned colder with each step, and by the time my boots met the packed earth floor, my breath was fogging in the flashlight beam. I turned. The rocking chair was vacant. The blanket lay in a heap on the floor before it, folded in a way that seemed almost deliberate, like a snakeskin that had been shed. I stared, my brain struggling to process what my senses were reporting. And that was when the hatch slammed shut above me. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting wildly, and then heard something even more terrifying. The distinct sound of padlocks clicking into place, one by one from the other side. 3 separate clicks. Metal meeting metal, sealing me in? No. I scrambled back to the ladder, climbed halfway up, and threw my entire weight against the hatch. It was immovable. The iron felt cold beneath my palms, a coldness that had nothing to do with the ambient temperature. I could feel the etched words pressing into my hands from the outside. They are still below. Do not release them. Then a voice spoke so close, I felt a wisp of breath on my neck. Thank you for coming. We have been so terribly lonely. I tumbled from the ladder. The fall knocked the air from my lungs, and my flashlight went skittering across the dirt floor, sending shadows dancing along the cellar walls. I lay there, gasping, looking up at the darkness where the hatch had been, as the voice continued. It was a woman's voice, weary and old, and filled with something that was either sorrow or ravenous hunger. Please join us for supper. Please join us forever. I scrambled for my flashlight, snatched it up, and swept the beam across the cellar. It was empty. The shelves with their jars of putrid preserves, the rocking chair with its pile of gray cloth, the ladder leading to a door that would not open. Nothing else. No one else. But I could feel them now. Presences in the dark, watching me from corners the light could not penetrate. Who are you? I whispered. Silence. The cellar had returned to that same held-breath stillness I had sensed upstairs. I was alone. Except I wasn't. I was a prisoner. And something down here was very, very happy about it. I searched the cellar for another escape route. There was none. The walls were solid earth, compressed over decades, maybe centuries. The only way out was the hatch, and it was now locked from a side that should not have been able to lock itself. That's when I saw the box. It was crammed behind a shelving unit, a small wooden crate about the size of a shoebox, caked in dust so thick it resembled gray felt. I pried it free, wiped away the filth, and discovered words burned into the lid for the next one. May God have mercy on us. Inside was a diary, its leather cover brittle with age, and a single sheet of paper folded into a small square. I unfolded the paper first. The script was faint, but clear, written in pencil that had miraculously endured. At the top, someone had written, "Rules for surviving the Blackwood house." I read them by flashlight, my hands trembling while the darkness seemed to press in on me and the empty rocking chair began to creak. Despite the lack of any breeze, Rule 1. Never interact with the family between dusk and dawn. They will speak to you. They will attempt to touch you. Act as if they do not exist. Rule 2. When the supper bell rings, proceed to the dining room and take the empty seat. Do not consume what they offer you. Do not decline it either. Just sit there until they grow bored. Rule 3. If you find children playing in the upstairs corridor after midnight, do not participate in their games. Do not respond when they say your name. They learned your name by listening. They do not have your best interests at heart. Rule 4. The father visits every third evening. You will recognize him by his coveralls and the soil under his nails. When he appears, inform him the harvest is good. Even if you see no harvest, even if the land is barren, tell him what he needs to hear. Rule 5. At daybreak, you can speak and act freely. The family rests when the sun is up. Use this time to find the diary pages I have hidden around the house. They will explain what occurred here and how to stop it. At the bottom of the page, in a different, shakier hand, someone had added a final desperate line. I obeyed these rules for 3 months. It wasn't enough. I apologize to whoever discovers this. I apologize that I could not mend what we shattered. The signature was almost illegible. Eleanor Blackwood, May 1937. Somewhere above me in the house, a bell began to toll. And the hatch, the same hatch I'd been pushing against with all my might just moments before, swung open on its own, casting a pale rectangle of moonlight down into the cellar. They were inviting me to supper. If you're enjoying the story, please help the video by clicking the like button just above the comments. It really helps the Winds of Thought channel grow and reach more people. It's free and takes just a second. Thank you so much. I climbed out of that cellar like a person clawing their way out of a grave. My hands found the ladder rungs instinctively. I dared not look back at the rocking chair, the blanket on the floor, or any of the shadows that seemed to stretch toward me as I ascended. The paper with the rules was crammed in my back pocket. The diary remained in the box. I would retrieve it at dawn, when the rules said it was safe to move. The supper bell was still ringing when I hauled myself through the hatch and onto the kitchen floor. The sound originated from deeper within the house, a clear, sharp chime that felt out of place with the decay surrounding me. Everything else in this home was muted by grit and time. But that bell sounded as if it had been polished that very day. I stood in the kitchen, breathing heavily, and glanced at my watch. 8:47 p.m. The sun had set around.
It was 6:30.
I was well into the dangerous hours, and, according to the rules, I was supposed to go to the dining room and occupy the empty chair. Every logical fiber of my being shrieked at me to run, to get in my car and drive to Havens Creek, to sleep in the gas station parking lot if necessary. But I had read the rules. I had seen the desperate postscript from Eleanor Blackwood. She had followed them for 3 months, and it hadn't saved her. Running was likely no longer an option. Not since I'd unlatched that cellar door and announced my presence to whatever dwelled within. I walked toward the dining room. The house had changed. I couldn't pinpoint how, but the air felt different, heavier, warmer, and alive in a way it hadn't been. The wallpaper, which had been peeling when I first came in, now lay smooth against the walls. The dust that had coated every surface was gone from the furniture I passed, as if an invisible hand had been tidying up while I was trapped below. The dining room door was ajar. I hadn't left it that way. I pushed it open and entered. The table was now set for 6, not 5. Fine china plates I hadn't noticed before, white with delicate blue flowers on the rims. Crystal goblets filled with water that shimmered in the light of several candles. The candles were burning in silver holders down the middle of the table, their flames steady and bright, and seated in 5 of the 6 chairs were the Blackwoods. They didn't look like ghosts. That was the most disturbing part. They looked like a family at a Sunday meal, frozen in the moment before saying grace. A woman at one end of the table, her hair styled in a 1930s fashion, her dress immaculate and pressed. 3 children were arranged along one side. 2 girls, maybe 8 and 10. And a boy who looked younger, perhaps 5 or 6. The chair at the head of the table was vacant, but I recalled Rule 4. The father visited every 3rd night. Tonight, it seemed, was not his night. The 6th chair, the empty one, was placed directly opposite the children. No one moved. No one blinked. They sat with their hands folded in their laps, staring at their plates. And the only sound was the soft hiss of the candle flames. I forced myself to walk to the empty chair and sit. The instant I was seated, the woman looked up. Her eyes met mine, and I had to suppress every instinct to recoil, to speak, to acknowledge her presence at all. Her eyes were wrong. Not their color, which was a normal shade of hazel, but something behind them was empty in a way that living eyes never are. She looked at me the way a starving man looks at a loaf of bread. "We are so pleased you could join us," she said. Her voice was the one I'd heard in the cellar, weary, old, and famished. "It has been a very long time since we had company." I focused on my plate. "Don't acknowledge them. Pretend they're not there." Mother made her special pot roast, one of the girls said, the older one with pigtails and a dress that may have been blue. It's your favorite, she said. I kept my gaze down. The plate before me was empty, but as I watched, food started to materialize on it, not placed by any hand I could see. It simply appeared, piece by piece. Slices of a grayish meat that shone with grease. Potatoes that looked boiled and pallid. Something green that might have been string beans, though the hue was wrong, too dark, almost black. The aroma was overpowering, rich and savory. But underneath it was something else. Something that brought back the memory of the cellar. Of things preserved for far too long in the darkness. Eat, the woman said. Please, we went to so much trouble to prepare it. I didn't touch the food. I didn't push the plate away. I sat with my hands in my lap, just as they did, and I stared at that plate of impossible food while the Blackwood family watched me with their hollow eyes. The boy began to cry. It started as a soft sound, hiccuping breaths that turned into quiet sobs. She won't eat it, Mother. She doesn't like us. She's going to leave, just like the others did. Hush, Sam. The woman's voice became sharp. We do not talk about the others, but I don't want her to leave. The boy, Sam, was looking directly at me now, tears rolling down cheeks that were too pale, too smooth, like wax molded into the semblance of a child. I want her to stay. I want to show her my rocking horse. I want Samuel. The woman's hand slammed down on the table, hard enough to make the china rattle. The candles flickered wildly. For a brief second, I saw something else under her face. Something gaunt and distorted, like skin stretched too tightly over a malformed skull. Then it was gone, and she was just a tired woman in a Depression-era dress, trying to maintain order in her family. I apologize for my son, she said, her voice now calm. He forgets his etiquette. We all do from time to time. It has been so long since we had a chance to practice. I kept my mouth shut. I kept my eyes on my plate. The food sat there, cooling, and I could feel the intensity of their stares pressing on me like a physical force. Minutes slipped by, or maybe hours. Time felt elastic in that room, expanding and contracting in ways that gave me a headache. The candles burned, but never seemed to get any shorter. The food on my plate remained exactly as it was, neither cooling nor solidifying as real food would. Finally, the woman sighed. She is not hungry this evening, she told her children. Perhaps tomorrow. We have so many tomorrows now, don't we? The children all nodded together, a gesture that was perfectly in sync. We share everything here, and we are always watching, the woman said to me. You may leave. But remember, this is your home as well now. The candles extinguished all at once, though there was no draft. When I fumbled for my flashlight and switched it on, the dining room was empty. The chairs were pushed away from the table at odd angles. The plates were once again covered in dust, the same I'd seen upon my arrival. The food was gone, but there were fresh moisture rings on the table where the water glasses had been, beads of condensation still fresh on the wood. I remained in that chair until I saw the first sliver of dawn creeping through the windows. Then I went to find the first page of the journal, because Eleanor Blackwood had promised answers, and I was going to need every single one if I hoped to survive whatever I had just walked into. The Blackwoods rested when the sun was up. I had roughly 12 hours to understand what had transpired in this house in 1937. 12 hours until the supper bell chimed again. Dawn broke over. Odo County like a fresh wound. I observed it from the dining room window, pinks and oranges spreading across the flat Nebraska horizon, and I felt a shift within the house. The pressure that had been building in my skull since I opened the cellar hatch began to recede. The air thinned. For the first time since my arrival, I could breathe without the feeling that something else was breathing with me. The family rests when the sun is up. That's what the rules had stated. I had about 12 hours of relative safety, and I wouldn't squander a moment. I started in the cellar. The hatch lifted easily in the daylight. No resistance, no whispered gratitude from below. I descended with my flashlight and the journal I retrieved from the wooden box, and I started to read as the morning light slanted through the opening above me. The journal belonged to Eleanor Blackwood, wife of Abraham, mother of Anne, Mary, and Samuel. The first entry was dated March 3, 1934. The drought has consumed everything, she wrote. 3 years now with no rain. The corn is dead, the livestock are dead. The bank has given us until spring to pay our debt, or they will seize the land. Abraham won't eat. He just sits on the porch staring at the fields as if waiting for God to reconsider. I no longer think God is listening. I don't think anyone is. I flipped through pages filled with growing despair. The children getting thinner, neighbors abandoning their farms and moving west. Abraham vanishing for days on end, turning with soil under his nails, and a look in his eyes that scared Eleanor more than their empty pantry. Then I came to the entry from October 17, 1936. Abraham brought a man to our home tonight. An old man, older than anyone I've ever seen, with skin like leather, cured too long in the sun. He called himself Jonas Killdeer and claimed he knew a way to save us. He said there was something under our land, something that was here before the Omaha people, before anyone, something that was hungry but could be negotiated with. Abraham asked what it wanted. The old man replied, a family, a whole family, given willingly. In return, your crops will flourish regardless of what the sky does or does not do. I begged Abraham to send him away. Abraham did not listen. The next few pages were water-stained. The ink smudged beyond recognition, but I could make out fragments. The ritual needed blood from each of us. Abraham made the children take part, said it was for their future. The thing in the ground accepted our tribute. Then, in an entry dated May 4th, 1937, it worked. The corn is growing. Our fields are the only green for 50 miles. The neighbors who remained are asking questions we cannot answer. We can't tell anyone what we've done, but there is a price we did not foresee. We are changing. The children no longer sleep. They stand by their windows all night, watching the fields, and I can feel something moving underneath the house. Something that is waiting. I fear we gave it more than our blood. I fear we gave it ourselves. The final entry was dated May 19, 1937. Abraham says, we can never depart. He says, we belong to it now. And when we pass, we won't truly pass. We will just descend into the earth with it for eternity. The children are afraid. I am afraid. But Abraham dismisses all protest. He says the land is finally productive, and that is all that matters. He says the entry cut off mid-sentence. Whatever happened next, Eleanor never recorded it. I climbed out of the cellar and started to scour the house. The rules indicated Eleanor had concealed journal pages throughout the building. I located the first one behind a loose section of baseboard in the parlor. It was wrapped in waxed paper, protected from the years, and it held a symbol made of interlocking circles and lines that was painful to look at. Underneath it, Eleanor had written, "This is the mark of the pact." It is etched into the floor of the cellar, beneath the dirt. As long as it is whole, we remain tethered. The second page was hidden inside the hollow leg of the dining room table. This one attempted to describe the entity. Jonas called it the one who waits below. He said the Pawnee knew of it long before white men arrived on this land. They gave it small offerings, grain, the first pick of the harvest stand in exchange. It left them alone. But it always desired more. It always desired a family. Jonas said it had been waiting for someone desperate enough to give it what it wanted. I suppose that was us. The third page was in the children's room, tucked under a loose floorboard near the rocking horse. Eleanor's handwriting was more erratic here, the lines uneven. I have discovered a way to break the pact. It is in Jonas's notes. He left them when Abraham drove him away. The binding ritual was performed on the spring equinox. It can only be undone on the spring equinox, using the same blood that forged the original agreement. But there is a problem. Abraham will never consent. And without all of us participating voluntarily, the counter-ritual will fail. I don't know what to do. The children cry at night, but no tears fall. I cry, too, and my tears have turned the color of corn. I sat on the floor of that children's room, surrounded by dust and forgotten toys, and I understood. The Blackwoods weren't haunting this house by choice. They were prisoners, trapped by a decision their father had made during the worst years of the Dust Bowl. Eleanor and the children had been forced into something they never consented to. And now, they were stuck, caught between life and death, eternally hungry, eternally waiting. The spring equinox. I took out my phone and looked at the date. October 23rd. The next spring equinox was 5 months away. In late March, 5 months of suppers, 5 months of obeying the rules, 5 months of pretending the Blackwood. Family wasn't there while they watched me with their hollow eyes and begged me to stay. But there was another issue, one that made my stomach churn as I reread Eleanor's notes. The ritual required the same blood that made the original pact. That meant Blackwood blood. And the Blackwoods, the real living Blackwoods, had been gone for 87 years. Whatever remained of them might look like Eleanor and Anne and Mary and Sam, but they weren't really those people anymore. They were echoes, facsimiles, things the entity had constructed from memory and hunger. Unless the original family was still down there somehow, still aware, still capable of choosing to break free, I thought about Eleanor's last message on the rules sheet. I obeyed these rules for 3 months. It wasn't enough. I apologize to whoever discovers this. She wasn't writing to a stranger who might one day buy the house. She was writing to someone who could finish what she had started. The sun was past its zenith when I found the 4th page. Hidden in the chimney behind a loose brick, it held a single line, written in letters that trembled with either exhaustion or terror. If you wish to free us, you must go down into the darkness. You must find where we truly are, and you must make Abraham listen. God help you. God help us all. Somewhere beneath the house, I felt something stir in its slumber. The father visits every 3rd evening. Tonight would be my 2nd night in the house. Tomorrow, I would meet Abraham Blackwood. The 2nd night was worse than the 1st. I spent the rest of the daylight hours fortifying myself. I ate the protein bars from my bag and drank water from bottles I'd refilled at the gas station in town. I didn't touch anything in the house, not the kitchen pump, not the preserved goods in the pantry, nothing. Whatever the Blackwoods consumed, I wanted no part of it. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the dead fields in shades of orange and red, I took a seat in the parlor with the rules sheet in my hand and waited. The supper bell rang at 7:23 p.m., 12 minutes past sundown. I went to the dining room. The table was set again, 6 places, candles aglow. The family was already there. Eleanor at one end, the 3 children along the side, the father's chair empty at the head. They observed me take my seat with that same ravenous patience. And Eleanor smiled. "We are so happy you returned," she said. "Some of our guests only stay for 1 meal. They flee in the night, and we never see them again." I stared at my plate. "Don't acknowledge them, Mother." She's being impolite again. The older girl, Anne, now new from the journal, said. Her voice had a whiny edge that might have been normal for a child if that child hadn't been dead for almost a century. "Make her talk to us, Ashan. Our guest will speak when she is ready." Food materialized on my plate. The same grayish meat, the same pale potatoes, the same 2 dark vegetables. The smell was stronger tonight, richer. And underneath it, I detected something that made my throat clench. Copper. Old copper. "Like pennies left in a glass of water, Sam wants to show you his horse," the younger girl, Mary said. "After supper, he wants you to come upstairs and see it." "Will you please?" I kept my eyes lowered. The candles flickered. "She won't play with us," Sam whispered. "She's afraid of us, Mother." "Why is she afraid?" "Because she does not understand yet," Eleanor said. "But she will. They all do eventually. The ones who remain long enough." I sat through another interminable dinner. Time warped and bent around me until I lost all sense of how many minutes or hours had passed. The family conversed among themselves, their voices fading in and out like a poorly tuned radio. Sometimes they sounded normal, a mother inquiring about school, children squabbling over trivial matters. And sometimes their words devolved into sounds that were not quite language wet, guttural, and ancient. Finally, the candles blew out. When I switched on my flashlight, the room was empty and dusty again. But this time, something was different. The water glasses weren't just damp. They were full. 6 glasses of water sat on the table, clear and still. And as I looked closer, I saw something floating in the one at my place setting. A tooth, small and white. A child's tooth. I backed out of the dining room and didn't stop until I was in the parlor. Rule 3. The children's games after midnight. I checked my watch. 11:47 p.m. I had 13 minutes to find a secure spot, somewhere I could wait out whatever was coming. I settled on the kitchen, positioning myself near the cellar hatch with my back to the wall. The hatch was shut, but I could feel warmth radiating from it, a living heat like breath from a dormant animal. The thing beneath the house was stirring, aware of me in ways I couldn't comprehend. At 12:01 a.m., I heard the footsteps. They came from upstairs from the second floor, and they were wrong. Too quick to light, pattering across the floorboards like rain on a metal roof. Then giggling high-pitched, bright, and utterly devoid of joy. The sound of something being dragged. "Eliza," Anne's voice drifted down the stairs, melodic and sweet. "Eliza, come play with us. We're playing hide-and-seek. Don't you want to play?" I press myself harder against the wall. Do not respond when they say your name. "Elisa, Elisa, Elisa." Mary's voice now, joining her sisters in a chant that made my teeth hurt. "We know you're down there. We can smell you. You smell like the living. You smell like breakfast." The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. I heard them stop, and I pictured 3 small figures standing in the darkness above, heads tilted at angles that functional necks couldn't manage. "Sam wants to show you his horse," Anne said. "He's been waiting so long for someone to see it. 87 years. Don't you think that's long enough?" A new noise. Something wooden clattering on the stairs, clunk, 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 getting closer with each impact. "Sam's bringing it to you," Mary said. "Since you won't come up, he's bringing it down. He's such a good brother. He shares." The clattering reached the bottom of the stairs and ceased. In the ensuing silence, I heard breathing, wet, ragged breathing coming from the hallway between me and the staircase. Then Sam's voice, much closer than it should have been. "Do you want to ride? I'll let you ride. You just have to close your eyes." I squeezed my eyes shut, not because he asked, but because I couldn't stand to see what was in that hallway. The breathing drew nearer. I felt something brush against my arms, something cold and small, like a child's fingers made of ice. "Please," Sam whispered, his voice right beside my ear. "Please stay. We're so lonely. Mother tries to make it nice, but Father won't let us leave. And the thing below keeps wanting more. Always more. And we're so tired, Eliza. We're so tired of being hungry." His fingers tightened on my arm. The cold burned like frostbite. "Rule 3, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "I'm not supposed to interact with you." The grip on my arm vanished. The breathing stopped. When I opened my eyes, the hallway was empty. And a wooden rocking horse lay on its side near the foot of the stairs, its painted eyes staring at nothing. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen with my back to the wall and watched the cellar hatch until the first gray light of dawn filtered through the windows. The third night, Abraham came. I knew he was there before the supper bell rang. The house felt different, heavier, darker, as if something had settled into its very framework. The temperature plunged so sharply I could see my own breath, and when I walked to the dining room, the candles were already lit, their flames burning black instead of orange. The family was seated, but their demeanor had changed. Eleanor sat with her shoulders hunched, her gaze fixed on her plate. The children were perfectly motionless, hands flat on the table, their faces blank. They looked terrified. And at the head of the table, in the chair that had been vacant for 2 nights, sat Abraham Blackwood. He was a large man, broad-shouldered and thick-necked, with hands that looked like they had spent decades breaking both soil and spirits. His coveralls were caked with dirt, fresh, wet black dirt, as if he had just climbed out of the ground. His face was weathered and hard, and his eyes were the most vacant things I had ever seen. Not hollow like Eleanor's, just empty, like windows into a room where no one had ever lived. "Sit," he commanded. His voice was deep and flat, devoid of any emotion. I sat. You opened the cellar.
Right.
It wasn't a question. You read Eleanor's papers. You think you understand what happened here? I stared at my plate. Tell him the harvest is good, even if you see no harvest. The harvest is good, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Abraham's mouth twitched. It might have been a smile. The harvest is always good. That's the pact. That's what I gave everything for. My wife, my children, my own soul. All for crops that will grow until the sun extinguishes. He leaned forward and I felt the weight of his focus like a physical pressure on my chest. You're thinking about breaking it, aren't you? Eleanor told you how. Spring equinox. Same blood. Willing participation. He laughed, a sound like stones grinding together. She tried for 3 months to persuade me, begged and pleaded and wept those corn-colored tears. But I didn't listen then, and I won't listen now. The land provides. That's all that matters. That's all that has ever mattered. He reached across the table and seized my wrist. His grip was crushing, and his skin was cold and gritty, like grasping a handful of frozen earth. You'll learn, he said. They all do. The ones who stay long enough become part of the family, part of the land, part of the pact. He released me and leaned back. Eat your supper, Abraham, Blackwood said. You're going to need your strength. The food on my plate had changed. It wasn't gray meat anymore. It was something red and wet, shaped like fingers. And when I looked closer, I saw fingernails still attached. I didn't eat. I didn't run. I sat there until the candles blew out, and I started to plan how I was going to destroy Abraham, Blackwood, and everything he had built on the bones of his family. I spent the next 3 weeks learning the rhythms of the house. Days were my sanctuary. I could move freely, search for more of Eleanor's hidden pages, and drive into Havens Creek for supplies. The townspeople watched me with that same guarded expression, but a few began to talk. Silas at the hardware store told me about the Blackwood family, how they'd been respected farmers before the drought, how Abraham had been known as a hard man but a fair one, and how everyone had been shocked when their crops kept growing while the rest of the county turned to dust. My grandmother said it wasn't natural. Silas told me one afternoon, counting nails into a paper bag. Said she saw Abraham's fields at midnight once, and the corn was moving. Not like in the wind, but like it was breathing. It's an old woman named Agnes Reed, who managed the tiny library in what was once someone's living room. Showed me newspaper clippings from 1937. The Blackwoods had vanished in May of that year. No bodies, no signs of a struggle. Just an empty house and 40 acres of corn that continued to grow for 3 years after they disappeared. Till someone finally set the fields on fire. The fire didn't touch the house, though, Agnes said, her voice dropping to a whisper. People tried. Lord knows they tried. But the flames just parted around it, like water around a rock. That's when folks stopped going out there. Nights were another world entirely. I followed the rules with desperate exactitude. I sat through supper after supper, watching the Blackwoods eat food I couldn't and didn't want to identify. I learned to sleep in the parlor where the children's footsteps seldom reached. Curled on the stiff-backed sofa, with a flashlight in my hand, every third night Abraham came. And every third night he told me the same thing. The land provides, and I would learn to accept it. But I was also hunting. Eleanor's hidden pages led me to more information about the ritual, about the entity under the house, about what truly happened that night in October 1936. I learned that Jonas Killdeer had been a medicine man, or someone pretending to be, who roamed Nebraska during the Dust Bowl, offering desperate families a terrible choice. The Blackwoods weren't the only ones who had accepted. There were other houses, other families scattered across the prairie. Most of them had collapsed into the earth within a decade, consumed by whatever they had fed. The Blackwood house had endured because Abraham had given it something more than the others, not just his family's blood, but their willing presence, their surrender. The key was in the cellar. That's what Eleanor's final hidden page revealed, stuffed into a crack in the chimney where I nearly missed it. The binding mark is carved into the bedrock beneath the cellar floor. She had written, 20 feet down, in a chamber that should not exist. That is where we truly are Abraham and me and the children. That is where the thing holds us when we are not performing for visitors. If you want to break the pact, you must go down there. You have to reach us, and you have to convince Abraham to let go. 20 feet down, a chamber that shouldn't exist. I waited until the spring equinox was 2 weeks away. Then I started to dig. The cellar floor was packed earth, as hard as stone after nearly a century of compression. I worked during the day, when the family slept. Using a pickaxe I bought from Silas and a shovel that bent against the soil until I learned to use shorter, sharper strokes. The Blackwoods didn't seem to notice. Or perhaps they did and simply didn't care. Maybe they wanted me to find them. After a week of digging, I broke through into open space. The smell that rose from the hole was nothing like the dry, ancient scent of the cellar above. This was damp and warm and alive, like breath from a mouth that had never been cleaned. I shined my flashlight down and saw a shaft descending into darkness. The walls were lined with roots that pulsed with a faint, rhythmic motion. Not plant roots. Something else. Something that looked almost like veins. I climbed down. The shaft went deeper than 20 feet, more like 30 or 40, though I lost track of the distance as the darkness enveloped me. The roots grew thicker as I descended, some as wide as my arm, and they trembled at my touch. At the bottom, I found a tunnel that curved away into the earth, lit by a faint bioluminescence that seemed to emanate from the soil itself. I followed it. The tunnel opened into a chamber, and I immediately understood why Eleanor had said it shouldn't exist. The space was enormous, easily 100 feet across and shaped like the inside of a ribcage, with curved walls that rose to a point high above my head. The floor was smooth stone. Carved into its center was the symbol I recognized from Eleanor's drawings, interlocking circles and lines. Grooves filled with something dark and dried. Old blood. Blackwood blood. And kneeling around the symbol, arranged in a circle like worshippers in prayer, were the Blackwoods. Not the versions I saw at supper. These were the real ones. Their bodies were shriveled and gray, skin stretched taut over bones, eyes closed. Mouths open in silent screams that had been frozen for 87 years. Abraham was the largest. His broad frame collapsed in on itself. Eleanor knelt beside him, her hands reaching for the children as if she'd been trying to shield them when the ritual took hold. Anne and Mary and little Sam were curled together, small shapes that made my chest ache with grief for what had been done to them. They were not dead. I could see their chests moving, shallow breaths that came perhaps once a minute. They were suspended, trapped in the moment of the pact, feeding the thing beneath the house with whatever was left of their lives. They've been this way since 1937. I spun around. Eleanor stood at the entrance to the chamber. Not the desiccated body kneeling by the symbol, but the version I knew from supper. The echo, the copy. She looked more solid down here, more real. And her eyes held something I hadn't seen before, hope. The thing makes us from memory, she said. Copies that walk and talk and pretend to be alive. But we are connected to our real selves. We feel what they feel, and they feel everything. How do I stop it? She moved closer, her steps silent on the stone floor. The ritual binds us to the symbol. Break the symbol, and you break the binding. But it must be done on the equinox, when the barrier between what's real and what the thing makes is thinnest, and it must be done with blood. Blackwood blood. Yes. She looked at the bodies kneeling around the symbol. Our blood, freely given this time. Not taken. That is what Abraham does not understand. The original pact was made with blood we gave under his duress. To break it, we must give blood of our own will. But Abraham won't agree. No, her expression hardened. He never will. He would rather keep us here forever than admit he was wrong. That was the kind of man he was in life. And that is the kind of thing he has become in death. Then how? You don't need all of us. She stepped past me toward the bodies and knelt beside her own withered form. You just need enough of us. Me. The children. If we give our blood willingly, it should be enough to fracture the binding. Maybe not destroy it completely, but weaken it. Create a flaw. And then she looked up at me, and I saw tears tracking down her cheeks. Not corn-colored now, but clear human tears. "Then you finish it," she said. "You are not bound to the symbol. You can do what we cannot. Take something iron, real iron, not this root metal. The thing grows, and shatter the symbol. The equinox gives you a window, sunrise to sunrise. If you can crack the binding before the sun sets on equinox day, the thing loses its grip on us. We go free. The house becomes just a house again." "What about Abraham?" Her jaw tensed. "Abraham made his choice a long time ago. He can live with the consequences." I spent another hour in that chamber, memorizing the symbol's shape, planning where to strike. Eleanor told me what she knew about the thing beneath, how it was older than memory, how it had slept under the prairie for millennia until men came with their hunger and desperation and awakened it, how it would sleep again once the black woods were free. When I climbed back up to the cellar, dawn was breaking. 13 days until the spring equinox. 13 days to prepare. 13 more suppers with the family that had become both my captors and my mission. The spring equinox fell on March 20th, a Tuesday that dawned gray and cold over Otoe County. I woke before sunrise, my body stiff from the parlor sofa, and felt the change in the house immediately. The air was thin, charged with an electricity that made my skin tingle. The barrier between worlds was thinning, just as Eleanor had promised. I had everything ready, a crowbar of solid iron, purchased from a farm supply store in a distant town because I didn't want Silas asking questions, a flashlight with fresh batteries, a knife in case things went wrong in ways I couldn't foresee, and a letter I'd written to my brother in Lincoln, explaining everything, sealed, stamped, and sitting in my car. If I didn't make it out, at least someone would know what happened in this house. The supper bell didn't ring that morning. The house was silent in a way it hadn't been since my arrival. When I walked through the rooms, I saw no sign of the family. No dusty plates on the dining table, no child's boot by the door. Even the rocking horse upstairs had vanished, as if the house were holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I opened the cellar hatch at noon and began my descent. The shaft was different in the equinox light. The root veins along the walls were pulsing faster, their rhythm almost frantic, and the air that rose from below was warm and wet and smelled like turned earth after a storm. The thing beneath the house was awake. It knew what I was planning. I reached the chamber and found the Blackwoods waiting, all of them. The withered bodies still knelt around the symbol, unchanged, but behind them stood the echoes, Eleanor, Anne, Mary, and Sam, standing in a line with their hands clasped like children at a school play. And at the far end of the chamber, his broad form blocking the only other exit, stood Abraham. "I told you," he said, his voice filling the space like thunder across the plains. "The land provides. The pact holds. Nothing you do here will change that." I gripped my crowbar and stepped into the chamber. "Your wife and children disagree." "My wife and children don't get a choice," started toward me, his steps shaking the stone floor. "They never did. A man provides for his family. A man makes the hard choices. That is what I did, and I would do it again 1,000 times. You gave them to a monster. I gave them eternity." His eyes blazed with something that was either conviction or madness. "After 87 years, I figured there wasn't much of a difference. We'll never die. We'll never be hungry. The drought took everything from everyone else, but it didn't take us. We're still here. We'll always be here. You're suffering, Abraham. Every day for almost a century, your children are trapped in the dark, feeding something that will never be satisfied, and you did that to them." He stopped, close enough now that I could see the dirt ingrained in the lines of his face, the emptiness behind his eyes. "Suffering passes. Land endures. Family endures. That's what matters." "No." Eleanor's voice came from behind him, and Abraham turned. She stood with her children, and there was something different about them now, something more solid, more present. The equinox was giving them strength. "What matters is that we had a choice, and you stole it from us. What matters is that we've been screaming inside our own minds for 87 years. And you never once asked if we wanted to stop. Eleanor." I'm finished, Abraham. She stepped forward, and her children moved with her. We're all finished. You can stay here with your precious land and your precious pact. We are leaving. She turned to me and nodded. I moved. Abraham roared and lunged, but Eleanor was quicker. She threw herself into his path, her echo form colliding with his, and they grappled in the bioluminescent light while I ran for the symbol. Anne and Mary grabbed their father's arms, pulling him back, and little Sam wrapped himself around Abraham's leg like an anchor, his small face set with resolve. Now, Eleanor screamed, "Do it now!" I reached the symbol's edge and dropped to my knees beside Eleanor's withered body. Her real body, the one kneeling here since 1937, still taking those shallow breaths. I pulled out my knife and made a cut across her palm, watching the blood well up not red, but amber, the color of corn and sunlight. The blood dripped onto the symbol, and the chamber shuddered. I did the same for Anne's body, then Mary's, then Sam's. Each time, the amber blood hit the carved grooves. The chamber shook harder, the root veins on the walls writhing like wounded serpents. The binding was weakening. I could feel it, a pressure releasing from deep below. No. Abraham threw his family off and charged at me. I barely got the crowbar up in time, and his impact sent us both sprawling across the stone floor. The iron bar clattered away from my grasp, spinning toward the chamber's edge. Abraham's hands found my throat. His fingers were cold and strong, squeezing with the strength of a man who had spent his life breaking sod and bending the world to his will. "You don't understand," he hissed, his face inches from mine. "If the binding breaks, the thing goes back to sleep. But we don't wake up. We just end. After everything I sacrificed, you want to make it all mean nothing?" I couldn't breathe. My vision was tunneling, and I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my temples, slowing as the oxygen depleted. Then, Sam's voice, small and clear. "Let her go, Father." Abraham's grip eased just a fraction. He looked up, and I saw his children standing over him, the echoes, their forms flickering in the equinox light. Eleanor stood behind them, her expression full of something that might have been pity. "We don't want eternity," Anne said. "We want rest. I want to see the sun again," Mary added. "Really see it one more time, please, Father?" Sam's eyes were wet with tears that had no color at all. "I'm so tired. We're all so tired. Just let us go." Abraham's hands fell from my throat. He sat back on his heels. And for the first time since I'd met him, he looked like what he really was, a broken man who had made an unforgivable choice and spent nearly a century refusing to admit it. "I was trying to save you," he whispered. "That's all I ever wanted. To save my family, we know." Eleanor knelt beside him and took his hand. "But some things can't be saved, Abraham. Some things just need to be let go." Crawled across the floor and grabbed the crowbar. My throat was on fire, my vision still spotty, but I could see the symbol clearly. The grooves were now wet with amber blood, the carved lines beginning to glow with a faint, sickly light. I raised the iron bar over my head. "I'm sorry," Abraham said, though I wasn't sure if he was talking to me, or his family, or the thing beneath the house that had been his companion for so long. "I'm sorry for all of it." I brought the crowbar down. The iron struck the symbol's center with a sound like a bell shattering. Cracks spider-webbed from the impact point, racing along the grooves, and the amber blood within them began to boil and hiss. The chamber screamed, not the Blackwoods, but the thing itself. It's the entity that had been sleeping and feeding beneath the Nebraska prairie for longer than human memory. The walls began to crumble. I ran for the shaft, climbed faster than I ever had in my life, and pulled myself out of the cellar just as the floor caved in behind me. The house groaned and shuddered. I sprinted for the front door, bursting out onto the porch as the morning sun still there, still shining. The equinox not yet overwashed over my face. Behind me, the Blackwood homestead began to sink. The house didn't collapse entirely. It sank about 4 feet into the earth before stopping, its foundation catching on something solid beneath the prairie. Bedrock, maybe, or the bones of the thing that had finally returned to its slumber. The cellar was gone, filled with dirt and rubble, and the rooms above tilted at angles that made walking through them feel like being on a listing ship. I stood in the yard and watched the dust settle. My throat bruised and aching, my hands still gripping the iron crowbar. The morning sun was warm on my face, and for the first time since I had arrived in Havens Creek, the air around the house smelled like nothing at all, just Nebraska, just wind and dirt and the faint green scent of spring. Then I saw them. They emerged from the shadow of the leaning porch, one by one. Eleanor first, then Anne and Mary hand in hand, then little Sam trailing behind with his wooden horse tucked under his arm. But they weren't echoes anymore. They weren't withered bodies frozen in prayer. They were people, solid and real, blinking in the sunlight as if they had just woken from a long, troubled dream. Eleanor walked toward me across the barren dirt, and I saw her eyes were hazel now, warm and human. Tears ran down her cheeks, and she was smiling. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was different, too younger, lighter, free of the weight that had oppressed it for nearly a century. "I didn't think anyone would ever come. I didn't think anyone would ever stay long enough to find the truth. What happens now?" I asked. She looked back at her children, who had stopped at the edge of where the cellar used to be. They were looking up at the sky, their faces filled with wonder, as if they'd forgotten what clouds looked like. "We rest," Eleanor said. "Finally, properly." She paused and her smile grew sad. "Abraham chose to stay. When the binding broke, he could have come with us. But he went down instead, into the dark. I think he couldn't face what he'd done. I think he'd rather sleep with the thing he fed than wake up and remember." I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me thought Abraham deserved worse. Another part, the part that had seen his face when his children begged him to let go, understood that some punishments are chosen, not inflicted. "Will you stay?" Eleanor asked. "The house is just a house now. The land is just land. Someone should live here. Someone should make it a home again." I looked at the tilting farmhouse, the bare dirt yard, the 40 acres of prairie stretching out toward Havens Creek. It wasn't much. It was barely anything at all, but it was mine. "Yeah," I said. "I think I will."